Good afternoon. Austin Peightel and David Periard will speak on the topic of a 15-year follow-up survey to assess progress on Cyprus-Pond apple tree planting project.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is David, as he said, and this is friend and fellow student Austin Peightel. And we did a 15-year follow-up survey to assess the progress of a Cyprus-Pond apple tree planting project in the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge in Boynton Beach. Okay, so what was our primary objective? Our primary objective was to monitor growth, which is the height and survival of 6,600 trees planted in 2001 to restore the Cyprus-Pond apple swamp, and this included monitoring habitat and water quality. Okay, so some background. Cypress forested wetlands are an important habitat for wildlife. They provide food, shelter, and travel corridors. Vegetation in cypress swamps can remove pollutants as well. Logging has unfortunately removed much of Florida's ancient forests and the majority of large old-growth bald cypress in virtually all of the swamps in Florida. Bald cypress, which is also known as eternal wood, was marketed primarily as timber for durability, attractive appearance, and workability. Cypress was crafted into water pipes that lasted for over 100 years and shingles that lasted for over 250 years, so you can see how we get the name eternal wood. Researchers have noted that the loss of these forests lamented the misuse and abuse of this unique subtropical community due to the absence of a cohesive management plan. Large amounts of forests are being lost daily as the population currently uses cypress for timber and mulch. Although it is the most common wetland tree in Florida and usually is the dominant species in swamps with fluctuating water levels, cypress and forested wetlands have almost been totally disregarded in Everglades restoration efforts. These efforts were primarily focused on hydrology of marshes and tree islands. The ecological and functional value of forested wetlands are the least understood of the world's terrestrial ecosystems. And as part of Everglades management and due to the lack of information involving restoration of ancient forested wetlands, a pilot planting program was undertaken in 2001. The Arthur R. Marshall Foundation actually partnered up with Dr. Van Orman, right there in the middle, and Fish and Wildlife Service, FWS, at the Arthur R. Marshall Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge to initiate planting of a cypress swamp. The effort was based on general guidelines first developed by Arthur R. Marshall himself, a well-known environmentalist for whom the refuge was named in 1986. And this dynamic working plan incorporated refuge management plans for restoration of remaining historic cypress swamps to a functional ecosystem, and involved actually planting 200,000 trees, including pond cypress, red maple, and pond apple, over 15 years on 600 acres of refuge lands. So the goals of the original pilot program had three main goals, which included restoration of swamp habitat to enhance biodiversity, reduction of pollutants through nutrient uptake by cypress trees, thus enhancing water quality, and public participation in community projects that encourage, engage, and teach stewardship to a diversity of citizens. Included in the proposal was monitoring of hydrology, growth and survival of planted trees, and estimation of ground cover. Within the refuge boundaries are the most pristine habitats in the northern Everglades, and efforts are being made by all agencies to preserve this natural wilderness.
So when we get into the actual meat of the study or the restudy, we're looking at the materials here. What we see is very limited materials and very basic materials. This was because it is a restudy, so a lot of the technicality parts were already done. So we needed global positioning system in order to locate and mark predetermined plots from which we collected the data. Meter stick and measuring tapes were used in order to collect the data of the trees, which was the height of the trees as well as the diameter at breast height of the cypress trees. Nylon lines were also used to mark both the plots and the transects within the B3 impoundments. The methods, as stated before, also come from the 2007 study, and so we just followed along, kind of followed their procedures. What we measured was 8 40 by 80 meter quadrants that were predetermined, and we used a random number table to run a line transect through each of those quadrants, and then we measured every tree within a 4-meter vicinity on either side of that line transect. The data which we collected from those trees, as stated, was diameter at breast height. We also collected survivorship data, and we also measured the height of the tree using the meter stick. The trees were ID'd at the time of measurement due to season and hydro period. We used morphology in order to identify the trees, although most of the trees out in the area were actually bald cypress, as David had said. Most of the pond apples that were planted didn't make it through the increased hydro period in that area, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Yes, next. So as we see here, this is just the LWNR. This is a top-down just representation of the area, and what we see is in the B3 impoundment, this is where we collected our data, where we ran the quadrants and the line transects to measure the trees. That's also the area, of course, where the 6,600 trees were planted. This is the actual division of the B3 impoundment into the 8 different quadrants. And what we see here is we see an access road. This is where the GPS coordinates, the predetermined GPS coordinates were in order for us to mark and keep track of the quadrants that were predetermined in 2007 in order for us to run our line and line transects and the quadrants. We also see a canal that runs along the top border and also that eastern side of the B3 impoundment. This canal provides the necessary nutrients and water for the growth of the cypress trees and the other plants that are found in the area. So then we're getting onto the results here. What we see is a graphical representation of the growth of the cypress trees, or the survivorship, the overall the diameter at breast height, so and the girth of the tree, and also the height of the tree. This graph represents or shows the difference between the size of the trees collected in 2007 and the size of the trees collected in 2016. And what we see is an increase in all the plots measured. In 2016, we see an increased size of those trees compared to those measured in 2007, collected in 2007. As you'll note, we did not, in this graph, there are not all 8 plots listed. We were not able to collect data from all of the quadrants that they were able to collect in 2007. This was due to an increased hydro period. They just were not accessible for us to collect trees or tree data from off of the line transect. Again, this is showing the data analysis that we ran. We ran a one-tailed t-test to determine if the size of the trees had actually increased in size from 2007 to the data that we collected in 2016. And what we do see is that our t-values are larger than the t-critical value for a 0.05 level of significance. So when we're talking about when we get into the discussion, when we start talking about the survival of the trees, we see a sustained 46% survival from the time of planting. This was determined in 2007 data. They found a 46% survival of the trees planted, and also the data that we analyzed in 2016 found a 46% survival rate from the time of planting, signifying a stable population of about 46% of those 6,600 trees that were planted. When we're talking about, we can talk about the growth of cypress trees, which can be highly variable, and it depends on factors such as hydrology, phosphorus load, and soil conditions. As I said before, a lot of those factors are influenced by the canals, by the influence of the canals, located on actually 3 sides of the B3 impoundment, though only 2 were depicted. And as seen in the table, there was statistical significance in an increase of overall height and girth of the trees, which indicates a substantial growth or significant growth within the impoundment. The hydrology that we refer to within the paper and also within this study, it's we're referring to the water level, the nutrient uptake of the plants, and the flow of energy through the cypress system. We measure this using indicator species such as typha or cattails, which will grow substantially in high nutrient loaded waters. And we're talking about nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus and even potassium. And so ground cover, as I briefly mentioned before, the analysis of ground cover data that we collected in 2016 was very limited due to the flooding of the B3 impoundment. But what we do see in both 2007, in the 2007 study and in this restudy of 2016 was a predominantly a grass-dominated system, at least for the understory. The grasses such as spike rush and fleabane. And diversity, what diversity we saw out there was actually quite substantial for the time that we were out there. We had quite a few teams out there collecting data for the trees along the line transects. And what we found when we compiled all the teams saw was about 20 different species of birds, invertebrates, and reptiles, which is substantial considering that the area did have a high hydrology at the time.
So, in conclusion, cypress growth was significant over time when compared to historical data, which was expected. Flora diversity of the impoundment has almost become a monoculture, which means that there's only one species. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting really close from what we saw. This decline is expected and typical for a frequently flooded area. An atypically long wet season due to El Nino caused observed water levels to be higher than we expected. When considering these extended hydro periods, cypress succession of the impoundment's B3 is expected. This is due to the preference of Acer rubrum, which is maple, and Annona glabra, which is pond apple, of drier habitats, while cypress will typically have submerged roots, and given data on hydrology, cypress are sturdy, can withstand flooding, and even can withstand hurricanes. Future monitoring should continue to be relatively easy due to the location to both access controlled and public use areas. Collection of growth data will continue to be used for further restudies. Historical data is extremely important for future research, planning, and even legislative agendas. As natural ecosystems become less abundant, man-made areas can be the backbone of ecological diversity. The continuation of data collection within the B3 impoundment will be critical for future management plans. And then here we have some of our select references. And also, the authors wish to acknowledge the assistance of FWS staff member Rebecca Gibble, who helped facilitate the field work, and researcher Adam Shepard, who served as a member of the field team in 2007 and 2016. And we would also like to give a special shout out and thank you to Dr. Van Arman, who guided us throughout the whole project, every question we had, definitely led the group. And she's actually retiring very soon, so we would just like to say thank you. And I hope you guys have 15 minutes of questions. So.
Did you want to tell them what that group is?
Yeah, feel free.
Tell them what the group is.
Just the class.
Oh yeah. This is our environmental science class from last year. Actually, Catherine's back there. She was part of it. Yeah. So this was our class project for environmental science class. That was that fall of last year?
Spring.
The spring semester of last year. And like we said, we did have help. We split the group up into teams to collect the data, and we did have help from Adam Shepard, which was greatly appreciated.
So of the 6,600 trees planted, how many what percentage was cypress trees? Like, is it the 46%? Were they all cypress, or like how many of the cypress were?
The majority of them were actually cypress trees that we collected out there. I believe we only sampled. Go ahead, Dr. Van Arman.
There was 6,200 cypress trees.
So mostly the cypress.
They were mostly cypress, and they were different sizes. They were all bare root trees, which means they weren't in pots when we planted them. And they were, I can't remember what the smallest size was, 75.75 centimeters, and the next one was 121.1 centimeters, and the tallest one was 185.1 centimeters.
So is that 46% of the 6,600 or the 6,200?
It's of the 6,600 we measured, yeah. I believe we did collect data from 2 pond apples in the 2016 survey, so, which is very little, and we didn't see evidence of really any more than that, so.
We're really not through analyzing the statistics. I know it's been a year, that's fine. But every time we do one of these studies, the data we take, the transect data, the 4 meters on each side, that represents about 30% of that particular 40 by 80 block. And I just haven't finished the rest of the calculation.
Go ahead, Dr.
Oh, no.
Justice.
Any, easy question. Any evidence of recruitment within the belt transects that you took? Has nature done its thing in 16 years, or are they relying on
There was,
students replanning?
there was, however, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Van Arman, but
She will.
any of the younger trees that were found in the area, we didn't see too much growth if like below a certain height between the 2007 and 2016 data. So it kind of dropped or pulled our statistics down a little bit for the shorter trees. No?
No.
That's what I observed, but
There were, the growth was statistically significant from 2007, and there was evidence of significant recruitment.
So there were
There was
trees that were
one-
not planted by you guys within the belt
That's
transect.
correct. And one of
And
the,
were those measured?
if they were within that 4 meters of that transect, they were just added right in with everything else.
Okay.
But the,
So when you did your counts, there could be a chance that you would have a higher
yeah, we
number
could have
within
more
the
than
belt
6,600.
between
Yeah.
07
Yes.
and it
Yes.
would be
I guess that's
recruitment.
possible, yeah.
But the problem was that in between 2001, when they were originally planted, and 2007, when we did the first restudy, we had the 3 hurricanes. And they did impact the trees where they were pushed over on their sides, maybe from high water levels, maybe from wind. And the trees were laying on the ground, flat with the ground, and the branches were going straight up on a lot of those trees. But didn't one of you mention something about how important it is to keep that historical data? Maybe, David, you said that? Because when the headquarters of the Loxahatchee were blown down, I mean, they were killed, the whole building was destroyed, all of the original data was in there. And I had kept all the pictures, all the reports, all the background research, and I may have the only couch of that information that there is right now. And so that's how we're able to do this. So this was pretty a significant study.
Okay, quick question. So you're doing these measurements, call them deep at the DB.
DBH,
DBH, yeah.
diameter at breast height.
Okay. Not to speak for but whose breast height? I'm just saying because if you have different people coming 2007 to, am I being naive there? Or
No,
is it a
the
standard?
standard
No,
is
you're not.
1.3
Yeah.
meters
Okay.
from ground. So I'm
Is
not
that
sure what these guys
4D?
did.
We did
No.
4D.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was an estimate. Like I said, the area was flooded. The ground was also very soft. So when we measured the height of the tree, also we measured it from the base of, I guess, the soil or the base of the tree.
So it's just
Up
a
to the
term,
top.
not an actual.
Yeah, well, it is as Dr. Chestnut said. It is at 1.3 meters, and that ends up
Standard.
being just about.
Standard.
That is a standard. Yes, yes. When you're out in the field, things get a little, but averaged out, that's right where it's at. Yeah.
Tell them how we got in. That's funny.
Oh, we had to break in, so.
That's-
We had,
That is true,
'cause
that is
for that day, when we had to do it, we had class, we had to, don't tell anybody, even though this is recorded. We had that was crazy. What did we had to like crawl under a fence?
So I think Dr. Van Arman had notified them before that we were going to come in and do a restudy, a population restudy, and they had gotten some there was some new hirees or some new I don't know, officers or something that run the area, and they didn't get the message, so the message wasn't passed down. So the area that we needed to sample in was actually locked for the first travel in where we actually ran our line transects. So
You did have a permit.
yep. So we crawled through the gate and ran our line transects.
So 46% that you guys saw as survival, is that normal? Is that the average normally, or is that low? Is that okay?
That's a good question. I'm not actually sure what a normal level would be.
I don't.
Especially in
Yeah, I don't
as
think
a
it's as good as it should be, just because of the flooding and hurricanes and everything. So otherwise,
what's
it'll be
a good
normal.
level?
I don't know, but you know what else? They had culverts break there, 2001 to 2003. For 3 years, they had a culvert that kept breaking and flooding that area. So these trees that survived have been through a lot.
Now this area, this is one of the areas that they can I guess manually or artificially
Yes.
change the water level within this area. But I mean, for the most part, they choose not to. However, if in times of flooding in different areas, they can channel water into this impoundment. Elena.
I had kind of two questions. One, like, was the original in 2001, was it just like completely bare? Like there weren't.
You know what? I just had pictures. I should have brought some pictures. There were a lot of grasses in there.
Mhm.
It was just grasses, and then you can't see the background, but yeah, it was pretty much just what you'd see if you walked down into a field, a 6.5 acre field. That was it.
Okay.
No trees were out there at all.
And then what was the species diversity or richness beforehand? Because you said like there were like 20 different species when you.
Yeah, we observed about 20 different species of.
Do you know how many there were before?
Before the planting? Like
For the other
in
paper.
Yeah, when
2001?
it started, yeah.
I do.
She was there for this
She
whole
does.
for the 15 years, so.
This started with the Marshall Foundation, and John Marshall was the nephew of Arthur R. Marshall. Fort Whitney Refuge is named as they said. But John Marshall lives in Trump Tower. Well, he died last year, but he did. And so I met him in the parking lot at Chapel Bay Lake, and he'd come up and talk to me, and he came in one day and he says, I want to plant 15 cypress trees. Do you have students that can do it? And I said, yeah. And then we talked about hydro period, seasonality, genetics, and so forth. And it turned out he came in a couple months later and he said, oh, we're going to do a big project down at the locks, and your kids are going to lead it. So we trained the science club students. They became captains, and we had 50 students, and they trained for 6 months. Took them down there, and we really had over 450 volunteers. So we had a giant blackboard like that, and we had all the blocks written up on the blackboard, so we would know where each team took the volunteers. And they had like 20, 25 volunteers, and they were able to show them where to walk, so they didn't step on plants, how far apart the trees should go, and stuff like that. That's how that started. So it was really a huge PBA effort, and I was the field leader for the whole thing in 2001.
How far apart were they planted?
I think they were planted 3 to 3.5, maybe 4 feet.
4 feet apart?
We did.
Yeah, well, that explains probably why we see the die-off. That's
Pretty close.
That's not much elbow room for.
We
for
looked in
cypress.
the literature. We talked to people at FSU that were cypress experts. Harris, I think the guy's name is. And
Or
that's
from
what they
Florida
told
State.
us. But here's the
You go to cypress forest.
yeah.
There is that space. You
Oh.
see them kind of growing around.
No, that's not true, because we really,
Wow.
the Boy Scouts planted up, because that impoundment is 2 to 4 feet below ground level. So the Boy Scouts planted on Lee Road, on the south side of the road, going out to the ramp the next year. Those trees were enormous. They put
Oh, but
them,
that's along the roadside.
they put them
Yeah,
1 to 2 feet apart. They were supposed to go cull them out, and they never did that. So those things are jammed together, and they're enormous.
So that's like almost like a garden though along the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do want-
Versus a real system where there's real,
Yeah,
well, the difficult system to live in, where
Yeah.
you're gonna see that interspecific competition.
yeah.
I think that's why we see our low
Yeah,
numbers.
I do want to say, just when we were collecting the data, observations out in the field, the areas along the canals and the areas along the road did have what were a lot more dense areas than the area in the center, which I think kind of caters to your point there. There's just more nutrients availability in those areas.
Yeah, I think we see more of the edge.
That's just observations. I mean, we didn't do any statistics on that or collect data that indicates anything like that. But second question.
Well, I already asked my second question before, but are you gonna be able to like give this information to someone so they can like use it or just have it?
When you work down in the refuge, you have to give them a report every year. So they're gonna get a copy of this, and we're writing a paper that's gonna be published on this. And what else? Oh yeah, because they have a newsletter, and I'm writing an article on this project for that. They'll get all copies of everything.
Okay. So they'll be able to like use it in the future.
Well, yeah, because the refuge itself, they use all these projects that people do down here. Like, haven't you done a project down there too?
Every year.
Yeah, Justice does stuff down there too. So they take all these reports and they have their own conference just from the refuge, and then that gets written up in the federal, whatever their federal report is in here.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you.
No.